How is it now? Okay. I'm going to be real quick. This is the second author in our series with Lupita Aquino, La Comunidad Reads. We are so happy to be hosting this series. Those videos you just saw, show some of the work we're doing like this, particularly with our partner, the DC Public Library Foundation, who is supporting these events. So we just make you sit and watch those videos just so we can brag a bit about some of the good stuff that we're doing, of which this series is part of it. So thanks to the foundation. Thank you to Loyalty Bookstores for being one of our good partners in this work. We love working with local independent bookstores to connect people with literature and authors like John. I'll just do a plug. The next one is on September 19th with Alejandro Varela, right? And so we hope you'll come back for more of those and keep an eye on this whole series. We have a couple more great events that are on the way, and we hope you'll join. And with that, hand it over to Lupita Aquino of Lupita Reads, who is going to lead us in our fabulous conversation today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Oh, does this one off? It's still Mercury retrograde, so I guess we're going through that right now, which is fine. Should I try again? Oh, there we go. Hi. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. I just want to reiterate a huge thank you to the DC Public Foundation for making this possible, the DC Public Library for working so hard in like making this possible, taking their time to work through this all. I mean, I think it's such a blessing. My vision and my dream has always been to amplify Latino literature, Latinx literature, because I think our stories are so necessary, and I'm tired of the same old stories and narratives, and so I'm just so excited to have you here, John. I feel like I have been a fan of yours since before, this book, and so it's just such a touching moment to be able to be here with you. I do want to read your bio really quickly. John Manuel Arias is a queer Costa Rican American poet and writer. He is a Canto Mundo Fellow and alumnus of the Tin House Summer Workshop. His prose and poetry have been found published in Prank, The Rumpus, Friction, Joyland, Aztec Books, and he has lived in Washington, D.C., shout out to D.C., Brooklyn, New York, and San Jose, Costa Rica, with his grandmother and 4 ghosts. Which I hope we get into that later, because I have questions.
Everyone always asks me about the ghosts.
Yeah, well, we'll
it's the
talk
first
about
thing
it.
that they ask. Can you all hear me? Not at all. Hello.
Hey,
All right, cool. Hey, everybody.
So you're going to be doing a little reading for us.
I will.
And I'm helping too.
Yes, so Lupita will play our deceased matriarch. So
Do you want to tell everybody
it's
about
the
the
role
novel?
of a lifetime.
It
Yeah.
is. I'm so nervous. I've never acted before. I'm taking this very seriously.
I love this. So Where There Was Fire is about a family of Costa Rican women whose future was changed forever during a catastrophic fire in 1968, instigated by a sort of sinister fruit company. And 30 years later, our protagonist, Teresa, is reticent. She lives alone. She has a lot of anxiety, and she's haunted by the ghost of her mother. And so there is a hurricane, which is very appropriate, being expected. And we start off. I'll start reading. This is very early in the book, so not really very spoiler heavy. It's chapter 2, Teresa, Barrio Avila, 1995. At 9 that morning, a growing chorus of weathermen convened with their mothers to analyze the sky. They announced that a storm was indeed on its way. When? No idea. What kind? Even less information. But these meteorologists knew that the women in their lives could forecast better than any instrument. A pulsing knee's accuracy over a barometer, a spit-slicked finger enough to predict wind speed. No satellite could compete with their rural grandmothers who had once danced for rain. So they glued their ears to the phone and their eyes to the radar and reported what they could. And what they couldn't, their producers filled with replayed interviews and fashion segments. Observant clouds gathered over Barrio Avila. Teresa sat up in her bed, startled by a flashing news report on the television. She wasn't sure when she'd fallen asleep. 4 in the morning, maybe. On most nights, sleep came quickly to her, violently. But last night, Teresa felt as if she had waded into it slowly, almost willingly, as one does when playful moonlight splashes in the receding tide and invites you to join it. When it begs you to slip off your clothes, fold them neatly on the beach, and walk into the surf. Last night, Teresa allowed herself to dissolve into sleep, as if she were salt or sugar or already ashes. Immersed in it, she felt the borders that defined her disintegrate, and what was left inside her expanded, exploded until she was everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't sleep, but an impenetrable darkness that had swallowed her, a vacuum with enough gravity to warp time and space. It relieved her of her skin and each and every one of her memories, her daughter's laughter, the echoes of their screaming, the daily aching of her bones, the sweet tickle of a lover's bite, the aroma of sex, the stench of sex, the nostalgic, metallic taste of it. For 27 years, Teresa felt that she was dying every night.
You're such a pessimist. It's not that bad, you know.
The portrait of Amarga said.
Death.
The painting of her mother hung next to the vanity. The canvas cracked, its expensive oil paint darkened by the years.
Teresa, do you hear me talking to you?
Amarga continued chiding. Teresa shuffled over to the vanity with the gait of a moon crab. She scrutinized the state in which age had left her reflection. Crows left careless footprints around her eyes. Gravity swung rambunctiously from her jowls, her breasts. Shocks of wavy white hair sprouted from her temples, giving her an uncanny resemblance to the Bride of Frankenstein. In 4 days, Teresa would turn 60, the same age Amarga was when she died.
Add a couple of sixes,
Her mother's portrait said.
and you'll finally understand yourself.
Teresa gathered breath as if for a plunge.
It's your fault, you know.
Amarga said.
It's your fault I'm dead.
Teresa faced the portrait. Her mother raised her left eyebrow and let out a guttural cackle.
You see, you know it's true. That's why you're being punished. Me, your father, even Carmen, we're all gone, and you're still here.
Teresa sat back down on the bed to turn up the volume on the television.
Yes. She quickly, sorry.
It's my line.
I got into it. I knew it was going to happen.
It's okay. Yes, Teresa replied weakly. I'm still here, aren't I? Same as in life, Amarga's portrait wouldn't let up,
You're still here.
she said.
You're still here, but how long did it take you to get the nerve to come back?
Of course, Teresa knew how long it took. She'd counted it to the precise day. Amarga died that April night in 1968, and Teresa fled Costa Rica, abandoned her daughters, and exiled herself in Washington, D.C., where she stayed for 6 years, 2 months, and 19 days. When Teresa returned to Costa Rica in 1974, the house was just as she'd left it, because neighbors and burglars alike had convinced one another it was cursed. Teresa pushed open the black iron gate, its screech of metal and memory. She tried the front door, but her entry was blocked by a thick, stubborn chain. Instead of waiting for a locksmith, Teresa had slipped off her heels and trekked to the end of the property through the gardens, hoping to try the back door. 6 cycles of dry and rainy seasons had mutated the rows of manicured plants into a dense, powerful rainforest. Its canopy reached over the 2-story house, while the underbrush cawed, then hushed as Teresa advanced. Trumpet flowers from the tree called Queen of the Night heralded Teresa's prodigal return. Skull-shaped pomegranates littered the grass, seeds spilling from their surprised mouths like bloody teeth. Teresa caught sight of the dilapidated 1-story guest house at the back of the property, to which Amarga banished herself after Teresa married Jose Maria. Amarga had refused to watch her daughter fall in love with a peasant, shuddered at the idea of living off a laborer's salary. Amarga lived there alone and refused Teresa entry for 20 years. No one had even bothered locking the guest house's door. It opened with a slight push. To Teresa's surprise, the lighting still worked. It revived the rooms as a mortuary artist does a corpse's face. But what Teresa saw inside immediately made her drop her heels, slam the door shut, and sprint back through the gardens. Her voice broke as she telephoned a gardener to fell the rainforest, a locksmith to crack open the main house's front door, and a construction company to demolish the guest house. All three tasks to be done as soon as possible, or she swore to herself that she would leave Barrio Avila for good. In the guest house, from every surface, the dressers, tables, chairs, armoires, bookshelves, desk, window ledges, and the old Motorola television set, green candle wax cascaded onto the floor, coating the walls in a delicate dew, sealing the furniture shut, overflowing into an emerald lagoon that left not even a centimeter of tile visible. If Teresa had recovered from the sight and left muddied footprints as she crossed the floor of wax and made her way into her mother's bedroom, she would have found a letter pinned lovingly above the bed. A letter from Teresa's father, Tácito, who had been a lawyer for the American Fruit Company. A letter addressed to Amarga, dated the night he vanished, August 19th, 1948. Amarga's portrait interrupted Teresa's memory.
I waited for him.
She said in a melancholic, disarmed tone.
That's what the letter told me to do. Wait. Wait for me. Light a candle every night until I return. I will use it as a beacon to find my way home. And I did. I waited. Before he disappeared, your father told me that plantation workers in the South were planning a rebellion, and they were sending him to quell it. To send a lawyer to stop men with machetes? Who thought of such an idea? A gringo, no doubt. But your father was brave. That is, except when it came to facing me. That's why he left me a letter instead of saying a word.
Teresa remembered the green wax, its softness beneath her feet.
Imagine the sensation under my feet. 20 years of wax is oily. I almost slipped every day waiting for your father.
Teresa estimated the number of candles. How many wicks had Amarga burned?
Over 7,000.
Amarga said.
Until the night I died, I lit that many candles. He never came. But you know that. We're all dead, and you're still here. That was a lot of fun.
And the Oscar for
Stop.
leading actress.
Stop. I got into it because your book is so easy to get into in that way. You know, it's just so captivating. And, you know, we're talking about DC, we're talking about ghosts, the four ghosts you live in. Can you talk about your inspiration? When did the writing of this book start?
So I actually did this at an event the other night because I don't believe in linear time, but I guess I do when I look at the history of this book. This started in 2009. So we're in year like 14 of this entire evolution, which is terrifying that it's a large portion of my life that I've put into this little book. But the inspiration came from my family's history, and it came from Costa Rica's history itself. And so it was a really beautiful thing sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table in Costa Rica, letting my coffee go cold because her stories were just so good, right? I learned our great-grandfather was a union leader against the United Fruit Company, and he was hunted down during the Civil War. So it's those really beautiful things that you learn when you listen to those who know. So the inspiration came from those who were willing to tell me stories.
Yeah. How did you navigate what you would include and, you know, what you give and take to the novel, which, you know, I know we'll get into it.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite characters you had mentioned to me, they're actually inspired by, you know, some family members.
Yeah.
So how did you navigate what you would kind of give and take as you were writing the novel?
So it was a little difficult because, you know, a lot of these characters come from an older generation of my grandmother's family friends and people of her generation. And it was hard to separate them from the characters in the novel because I knew them so well in life. But a novel is not real life. So I had to sit down with myself and say, I need to branch off from this universe that is ours. I need to jump into the novel and the fictional universe where these characters will talk on their own, they'll play their own roles in the story, they'll make everything move forward. So it was a little bit difficult. It was like a spiritual practice, kind of. But I do love all the characters.
I do too. I mean, and you know, I feel like we talk a lot, and I've heard you talk a lot about how there's a lot of strong women in this book. And yeah, the majority of the characters are all very strong women, but there's also male perspectives and male characters. And there's this, I feel like, this approach to redemption for everyone, you know, and showing that no one person is good or bad. You know, they're all impacted by the history, by their environments, by everything. And so I was curious about how you decided to follow which voices you included. And if you want to talk about the characters that you wrote about, I would love for you to share them.
Yeah, all the characters, including those who are murderers, including those who, no, not including the ones that have sterilized populations,
Right.
but
No, not those.
yeah,
We'll talk about that character.
Yeah, not those. But I thought it very fair to allow the characters room to grow if they wanted to grow. So, like, as an author, I was not giving these machista men redemption, but I was allowing them the space to say, can you make it better? Do you feel bad? And sometimes they didn't, right? And that comes across in the novel, but sometimes they did. And which is what real life is. Sometimes people repent or they feel remorse, and sometimes they don't. And so I thought reality, especially when it came to like sort of the gender dynamics of men, you know, most of the time they're pretty shitty, but sometimes they can either make it right or they can make it worse.
And yeah, I guess redemption is a weird word to say here.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is things are the way they are. But when you have an awareness of why things are the way they are, which this book is full of secrets. A lot of people don't know why things are the way they are. And I'm trying to kind of, you know, go around spoilers because I don't want to, there's so much good stuff. I don't want to spoil this for anybody. But yeah, so I think you're right. It's a weird way, especially with the male characters, to use.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think an awareness of complicated histories is what we're talking about, right?
Yeah. I mean, you have the sort of the nucleus of this community is a fruit company's banana plantation. And historically, you look at them and they were essentially slaves on these plantations. They would get a salary, but the United Fruit Company would have a general store and a liquor store and a bar where the workers would spend their money. So the company was never out any money. And you had high rates of alcoholism, you had high rates of violence within the communities and just abject poverty. And when you put people in these conditions, there's only so much that they can do. There's only so much room that they can move around in. And these things happened because they happened. And so I thought that was really important to highlight in the book and also to highlight the problems that are today, right? Yeah. Which is sterilization, which is domestic violence, things that are still very applicable today but have a lot to do historically in this book.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, I know we talked about the characters, and I'm thinking about how the American Fruit Company, I sense it as a character in this book.
Yeah.
You know, and it's the reason for a lot of this family's fractures and problems. And so, you know, in terms of research, a lot of what you're touching on is reality.
Yeah.
You know, U.S. imperialism across Latin American countries, how these companies come in and they destroy land and they, you know, ruin lives. So yeah, I'm curious about your research and folding that into fiction, though.
Right.
I felt like you did it so well.
Thank you. It was definitely a lot of reading. It was definitely a lot of essays and definitely a lot of sleepless nights knowing what the U.S. government did and these multinational conglomerates did very boldly and without consequence. And there is still no consequences, right? These fruit companies are completely unscathed. But there's this great Duke University Press, if anyone is interested in Latin American studies, they have a fabulous selection. It is gigantic. They have a 40% off sale every November, hashtag not an ad. But there's this great book called Banana Wars. And Banana Wars handles the 100 years of the United Fruit Company from every single aspect. So it's first-person narration, it is found documents, it is the economics. It teaches you all the ways in which the United Fruit Company sort of slithered its way in and controlled everything. And so that level of research was really cool. And then also firsthand accounts, right? Watching people talk about, so also a large part of the novel, without giving away any spoilers, is that, well, we can talk about the reality of it.
Yeah.
So Standard Fruit, which today is Dole Bananas, was using a pesticide in the 1960s called Nemagon. Dow Chemical, that was producing it, they said, hey guys, this pesticide is causing sterility in mammals at a rate of 70%. We're pretty sure your workers are being sterilized. And Dole sued Dow for everything that they had when they threatened to cease operation, and they still imported it by the ton for 10 years. And they sterilized 30,000 Costa Ricans. Nemagon plays a role in this book. And so it's like that saying that truth is stranger than fiction.
Right.
Truth is more sinister than fiction. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think knowing that, I mean, for me personally, there's a lot of, I can admit that I don't know,
Yeah.
you know, and I think.
And that's the point.
Yeah.
Is that they keep it so secret. They do
Right.
a wonderful job. They're fantastic at keeping it buried. They're making sure. Yeah.
That people don't know.
That people don't know.
And, you know, and I think it's part of the reason why, right? I think of it in the sense that it's part of the reason why in our countries there's so much of a struggle, right? There's so much turmoil. And I don't want to say that there's not happiness and joy too, but it contributes. And I think not acknowledging that is part of the problem, right?
Yeah. That was also a really big thing in the book, is that, you know, a lot of, we don't want to call it trauma porn, but a lot of books really focus on a lot of the really horrific aspects and the trauma that characters go through, which is incredibly important, and it is necessary because for most of human history, we haven't talked about trauma. And now we're talking about it, and it's really fantastic. But in the book, I wanted there to be little shining moments of joy. Just one of the characters has like a cherry red Peugeot car, and another one looks at his sculpture that he sculpted 20 years ago. He looks at it every day, but he can't speak. So there are these tiny little things that remind them of life when they are so surrounded by death and so stuck in the past, that I think those tiny little glimmers of joy were really necessary.
Yeah, and you know, the thing that I love about your novel too is that death is not final, right? Because we have the ghosts. And so could you talk a little about incorporating magical realism in here?
Sure.
And also, I mean, how you feel about magical realism and what the state of it is currently?
Yeah.
Because I know I have a lot of friends and people who feel like they can't come to stories because they think that magical realism is something that's so far out. You know, I had a friend, I was reading a book, Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo.
Right.
And, you know, they were like, yeah, I didn't know it was magical realism. I was like, it is? You know, because I feel like a lot of it is so natural to us and to our stories. Like, I mean, you living with 4 ghosts is not surprising to me. I just want to hear about it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it was surprising to me the first time it happened, the first time that I became aware. But death, so there's a great line from Mrs. Dalloway. I'm a huge Virginia Woolf stan. I love her. That's a white lady I will forever read and
Ride or
cape
die.
for. Ride or die for Virginia Woolf. And there's this great scene where Mrs. Dalloway is thinking to herself, does it bother her that death ends absolutely? And I thought, no, I don't want my character to think that death ends absolutely. It continues on. Ghosts continue on. And handling it in the book, magical realism is an important cultural, I don't want to say cultural identity, but it is a cultural identity where, you know, if somebody has a dream and they can see in the future, then as a Latin American or somebody from an indigenous community as well, you don't question it. It is reality. Like, I can say to many Latinx people or whomever that I lived with 4 ghosts, and they go, oh, cool, what were they like?
Yeah. What were they like? What were their names?
What were they up to?
What did they want from you?
How did they haunt you?
Right.
There's no surprise, which is really lovely. And so when you add that in literature, it's really cool, right? There's a lot of criticism of magical realism, and I will nerd out a little bit because I love magical realism. People think that magical realism in fiction is merely nonfiction. That because you have ghosts and because you have, elements of magic or premonitions, that an author is only doing it because it is the truth. But that undercuts an author of magical realism because there's a technique there. Why are the ghosts happening in this novel? How is it different from how horror uses ghosts, right? And the ghosts are here to remind us of what was buried, right? And that's the only way that, the history of a fruit company or the history of a coup d'etat, whatever, or of slavery in Beloved. That's the only way these things can bubble up to the top of the surface. But what are they doing is they're showing us either the past reality or the reality right now that society is trying to sweep under the rug.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's so powerful, and I think that it does get often overlooked.
Yeah, people don't respect it as a genre, which is a
Right.
bummer. Actually, Toni Morrison, when they called her work magical realism, she was like, "What? That's
Yeah.
like children's stories." And
Yeah.
the interviewer said, "No, it's Gabriel Garcia Marquez, it is, etc." And she goes, "Oh,
Isabel
that's really cool.
Allende,
Maybe."
Yeah.
She said, "Maybe."
Let me think on it, maybe.
Yeah, it's not seen as such a intricate and very masterful genre as it actually is.
Yeah.
There's so many fantastic elements that, because somebody thinks it's cultural or because somebody thinks it's fantasy, it's overlooked.
Right.
But it is such a fabulous genre.
It is, and I think part of why, and I know I have friends that immediately hear it and they're like, yeah, that's not something.
Right.
I don't like magical realism.
They're dorks.
Right. They're like, I don't like fantasy, and I get it. Like, I don't judge what people want to read or don't want to read.
I
I
do.
try
I'm
not
just
to.
kidding.
It's okay if you do, but as long as people are reading. But I think when we talked to Elizabeth Acevedo, if I can share something, she said that basically like, it's like just daily magic. Like think of
Yeah.
it as like simple magic.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. Well, wait a minute. I feel like people do try to make it this bigger thing, and it's not. Like, it's every day in your life. I mean, come on. So you probably have somebody that reads the clouds, or feels like, oh, wait a minute, I can feel it's gonna rain in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
My
it's like,
knees do that for me.
yeah, and we don't question it,
Yeah.
right? But I think when you put the label of magical realism, and there's like, wait a minute, magic is not real.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute, magical realism.
Not to plug Duke University Press again, but there is a book called Magical Realism, and it is a series of, it's like 300 pages of scholars just yelling at each other. They're all trying to define magical realism and negating the person who came before them. It's such like a contested genre. No one knows what it actually is because it's so many things. It's a cultural identity. It is a literary mode. It is a genre. It is all of these things, but trying to define it is kind of colonial in a way. Trying to draw borders around it to define it is the opposite of what it wants to do.
Right, and I think for a time they were saying, I read some thoughts and opinions that only like Latinx literature could be magical realism. Everything else you couldn't apply, and it's just, you're right. It gets colonial.
Yeah, I used to be one of those people, like maybe 10 years ago when I was first getting into the genre. But no, magic happens in all sorts, and a lot of this, there's a weird way to see it, but a lot of the magic comes from indigenous cultures, right? And so sometimes you have white men like Mario Vargas Llosa and Gabriel Garcia Marquez who are writing about sort of indigenous practices as magic, but then they also exist in these communities. So there's always that ebb and flow that's happening in the genre within itself that is trying to decolonize itself too. So, and that is all around the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I could talk about magical realism forever, but
Me too. Are y'all bored? Don't.
no, it's not that. I just want to make sure we get to these characters.
Oh yeah, true.
So I will tell you all, when you pick up the novel, if you already have, then you know that, yeah, the plot is like driving. It starts with this, not to share too much, it's a massive fire. There's a cover up, and there's a fractured family. There's a mother and daughter who haven't spoken to each other for years, like we read, you all know. Every character, though, just feels so real. And I want to know about the inspirations behind the characters, particularly my favorite characters, which you'll know, the Three Marias.
Yeah.
Because I love, tell us a little bit about the Three Marias, about the inspiration behind all your characters,
Yeah.
if that's not too much of a big question.
So for my family who's here, the Three Marias are after the Tias. I loved them so much in life, and I say it in the acknowledgments that there are so many people who I loved in life who made it into this novel that I want people to love on the page. Beyond their, right, it's like death doesn't end absolutely for them. It continues on in this book. And if the characters, and I'm really glad the characters feel really real for a lot of people, it's because I loved them, because I heard them laugh, because I heard them interpret their dreams or interpret my dreams, or listen to Louis Armstrong sitting in their wheelchair and talking about whatever. That I lived with these people, I loved these people, and I wanted to do them a lot of justice. Because you have to give characters in a book, there's conflict, and you have to make them complicated and multidimensional, and that means being a shitty person sometimes. But to give them that space and to be fair with them, being able to redeem themselves if they have been shitty was really important.
That's so beautiful. I will say, I feel like maybe I'm just not part of the circles that talk enough about drawing inspirations from life. You know, as readers, like, you don't want to make an assumption about a writer's life, like, oh, that's his aunt's right there, that's his brother, he's writing about his sister. I talked to Angie Kim, who has a wonderful book, Happiness Falls. It's a murder mystery. The father goes missing, and she's talking about how her husband for a long time was like, can you not write nonfiction and about us? And I was like, wait a minute, is that
Did
why
he
he
go
went
missing?
missing? Yeah. So you know what I mean? I feel like, is it terrible to be honest about, like, the inspirations that come from life as a writer? And not terrible, but like, is it like a sensitivity?
So I don't think the characters are close enough to their real life selves that they would get confused. So it's like, it kind of felt like having a revival of a play, just casting different actors in them, right? So there are aspects of real life, but they're acting out a completely different type of performance, right? So, and I don't know, I feel like Les Diaz would read it and they'd have fun. I feel like they'd have a little bit of fun.
And to be able to, like, use that as a launching pad is kind of how I see it, you know? To have this imagination of what this person was like, but it's just a launching pad, and you're like, wait a minute, where is this voice taking me?
Yeah.
And how do you, like, sit with these voices as they're coming and just, like, right into them?
Well, a lot of them wouldn't shut up because they came to me in dreams, because they were the ghosts, because they...
Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
They were the ghosts that you lived with?
Yeah, a few of them.
Okay.
A couple of them.
That's awesome.
It's really funny, and I guess I'll be like this in death, where I'll come to my descendant and be like, hey, write a book about me. My life was interesting, right? And it's kind of like a monologuing interview. It's kind of, and I'm like, leave me alone. I'm just trying to, it's 4 a.m. I'm trying to sleep.
Yeah.
I had really weird visits. I had scary visits. I had fine visits. I had laugh visits. So if these characters also made it into this novel, it's because they were very insistent about it too. Yeah.
And, you know, you're talking about ghosts, but I know in general, some of the writers I've talked to, they're just haunted by questions, right? And so what are some of the questions that you're writing into that haunt you in this?
A huge question was, what does it look like when justice is possible?
Mm-hmm.
What does it look like when we can actually get there? When the secrets of multinational organizations or secrets kept by our family, what happens when they can come to the light? And what could we have done with that information? You know what I mean? Because we're surrounded by secrets now. We don't even know how many secrets are surrounding us. And what would we do if we had the chance to find those answers?
Yeah, I love that. You know, because I feel like, and I want to read you a line, and this is not a spoiler at all, because I feel like it's a maybe a thread or a question that I really connected to. It's from one of the characters who says, "We're from different generations. We saw different things. Everyone watches their parents and swears to themselves they'll be different, that they won't fall into the same traps." And I kept thinking, I was like, you know, you're writing into these histories, these personal histories that we carry, that we use to inform ourselves of how we will show up in the world. Like, I'm not going to be like that. I'm going to do different. But then there are unbreakable patterns that we subtly still connect to.
Yeah. That scene is really, it's really interesting. And I had a good time writing it because it's sort of like a play. It is 4 women getting drunk at a kitchen table before a party. And they are talking about generationally how different it is to be a woman and how differently it is to be in love or to be mothers or to be spinsters or whatever this is. And I thought that was really important because I chose a very specific generation of women to write about that I haven't often read, and who I think that because of machismo and because of Catholicism is very unfair to them anyway.
Yeah.
And so to give them the space to have these generational and geographical conversations I thought was really important. Because on the page, I don't often find them having the room to talk, and I just wanted them to have the room to talk.
Yeah.
And those were the things that they said.
Yeah, and I had a note in there when I read that part where I was just like, yeah, this is something we don't often get to say out loud.
These are ladies from the 30s. They were born in the 30s. They're 60 years old in the 90s, and they have different thoughts about what living in machismo is, about what feminism is, and living with this generation as well. I lived with 4 ghosts with my grandmother, but I also lived with 4 older ladies, right? I lived with my grandmother and the 3 great aunts, and I added it up one day, and I'm like, wow, that's more than 300 years of women.
Yeah.
And that's 300 years of stories, which was really fabulous, too.
And secrets, right?
Oh, my God.
So many secrets.
Oh, my God.
I do want to let you all know we will have time for you all to ask questions too, so start thinking about those. I have just a few more questions for you. We were talking over there in front about how there were so interesting things that, as we're reading it, I asked you, okay, how do you pronounce this character's name? And I was like, I'm going to say it in Spanish because that's how I'm reading the book in Spanish, because we exist in 2 languages.
Yeah.
And so I want to kind of talk about some of the choices that you made grammarly to use like traditional, Spanish grammar, but apply it to the English language.
So when I first started off with Latin American literature, I started off because I couldn't read Spanish very well, and I can still barely read it really well, even though I think I have a minor in Spanish literature. I don't know. But I was very intent on making sure this is a novel about Costa Rica. It is happening in Costa Rica. That means that the novel is happening in Spanish. And it happens to be written in English, because that happens to be the language that I'm kind of good at writing at. And I thought it was important. The characters or the narrator says, hands of bananas. An American reader won't recognize that, but a Spanish speaker will, right? A bunch of bananas is called a hand. And there are upside down exclamation points and upside down question marks because these characters are speaking in Spanish, which is also why I found it really important to not italicize. Because why would I italicize a word that's being spoken?
Right.
So, I think it's racist anyway, but
Yeah.
also particularly because this book is happening in Spanish.
Yeah. I know, for our last event that we had with the series, we got into translation and how the importance of, you know, we're Latinos and we primarily speak English, and we're having this conversation in English about, you know, our heritage, our culture, our families. And then we're also, in a way, kind of fractured from Latinos who can only speak Spanish, who only read in Spanish. And how do you feel about the current state of translation? And this might be a big question, not to try to answer anything, but I'm always curious just how you feel about the ease to have this book translated in Spanish for family members that want to read it and can only read it in Spanish.
There is no ease. I'm actually very. This is actually something that's a little touchy, and I'm not going to sort of chastise my publisher, but I am going to chastise the way that translation is handled. And the way that translation is handled is usually books in English are sent to Spain, and Spain decides. Spanish publishers decide whether or not they want to translate it. So the fact that the colonizer still has the highway to make sure that these books, to make sure, you know, I don't know if Spain loved my book. I don't know if they found it worthy to translate into Spanish, but at the very moment, it is not translated into Spanish, which is very hurtful.
Yeah.
And I still don't know how to reconcile that. People from Costa Rica ask me all the time, when can I buy this book?
Yeah.
And I go, dude, I don't know.
Yeah.
I very honestly don't know, and it's very painful. Because it also feels a little bit imperial. It also feels a little bit colonial that I'm writing in English, right? And Americans, English speakers, can read my novel, but Spanish speakers in Costa Rica can't yet, which is terrible. I hate it.
Yeah, and you know, I have a lot of people that I talk to online who are constantly asking me, you know, when is this book available in Spanish? You know, I read in Spanish, my mom reads in Spanish, and my hope is just we continue to talk about. It's like a bad business model too, if you think about it.
Publishers are under the impression that Latinx people, Latinos, don't read.
Yeah.
They don't think that we consume literature, which is why American publishers export translation rights. They could very easily translate and print their own books. They totally have the network for it, but they don't because they think that we don't read. And that also is incredibly hurtful, which means also that they don't know how to market to us either, that Latinx books and books by authors of color do worse than books by white authors because the cultural understanding of marketing and publicity doesn't even exist. So it's the systemic issue that being on the inside as an author is very bothersome and very troublesome, and I hate seeing it. But I also don't have any answers because there are only 5 Latinx editors in the entire publishing industry, and mine is one of them. So what do we do?
Yeah.
It's
I don't have
crazy.
any answers either. And
Yeah.
we, like, the last thing, we also didn't have any answers. And all I could say is, like, I hope people are watching this virtually. And this will live online. And what we continue to do is continue to talk about this, continue to bring it up.
Yeah.
Because you're right. This could happen in-house easily.
I think so.
I
Just
think so,
hire
too.
a translator. They'd be happy to do it.
Right.
Also, translation, who, if anyone translates here in the audience or online, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. You all do such fabulous, fabulous work. But also, look at some Costa Rican writers to translate. If you want to translate Carmen Lira
Yeah.
or Carlos Luis Fallas.
Yeah.
Who else? Quince Duncan.
Do you want to touch on that, on the lack of, like, of, you know, Costa Rican writers and in general writers that are not Mexican, right?
Yeah. I had a lot of trouble, not of my own doing. I had many publishing professionals tell me that people would not care about this book. I've had agents tell me, oh, I didn't know there was a civil war in Costa Rica, and I don't think readers will either, so I'm going to pass on this manuscript. And I believe that Americans, right, let's talk about the white gaze and an American audience. They see Costa Rica as a place with beaches and monkeys and yoga retreats, and people aren't there. It is a setting. And if there are people there, they're handing you a warm towel after you swim in the infinity pool. There is no interest in the humanity of Costa Ricans and other parts of Latin America, right? But a huge part of it, too, is because Costa Rica is not seen as a cultural hub. It is not seen as a place with a rich, delicious literary history. There hasn't been a lot of translation. There are a lot of books that are so wonderful to read and so incredibly important that inspired Gabriel Garcia Marquez to write his book, that inspired Pablo Neruda, that these people were the first to fight against the fruit companies, but they're inaccessible in English. And so if there are any translators in the audience, anyone who knows any translators, look at these Costa Rican authors because they are so ahead of their time, they are so important, and I wouldn't have a book without them to guide me. Right? I come from such a rich literary history, and I want that to be a takeaway from this book, is that everyone should invest in Costa Rican literature and not just my own book on your bookshelf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We want more.
Yeah.
That's always been what I say. We want more. So audience questions. I'm so sorry. I know we're going over, but I love talking to you. Yeah.
Hi, Abby. Ooh, the cover. So, as an author, covers are very funny. Sometimes publishers listen to your inputs. Most of the time, they don't. My publisher listened to my input, and we got this incredible Brazilian designer who does all of Penguin's reprints. His name is Rafael Nobre. He is a queer Brazilian artist, and he created this and like a few other designs in 2 weeks. He read the book. He said, there's a little Latin American house. There's some bananas.
There you go.
And everything's on fucking fire.
Takeaways
This
from
is what
the
the book is about.
And they can't market this?
And they can't market
Come on.
Thank you for the question, Abby.
Hi, I'm Adrian Garcia. I am part of a gay Latino book club here in DC called Los Bookies. So your book is on our list to read, and we're really excited about it.
Thank you.
And I just love, because a lot of the queer Latino books that we read have like queer Latino in them, and like this one just felt so different too. But I have two quick questions. One is, how do your ghosts feel about the final stories that you wrote about them? And then the second is, I always ask this question from authors, is like, what is the one like sentence or part of the book that you read and it still slaps and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe like I wrote something so beautiful, right? That like you just feel like so, that gets you just so emotional that you feel like sums up your work.
For the second question, the whole thing. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'll think of that line in a second. But I do believe, or in my experience, ghosts are very much sequestered to where they haunt. And it's not really haunting. They're just like hanging out. I don't think ghosts are very like sinister. They're just like, fuck, I'm dead and I'm bored.
Yeah. What else do I do? Let me go haunt this
Besides,
guy.
fuck with me. So the ghosts have not followed me from Costa Rica. I am free of them. I am only haunted by how loud New York City is. And I think I'm really happy. So that part that you read about the women drinking and talking about womanhood.
I think it's 189.
Here we go.
189.
189. So one of the Marias says to the other that you're better equipped to dodge those traps than we were. But remember, you learned because you saw us fall. And her sister grinned and she goes, that's deep. The other one says, oh, shut up. And the other one says, Aristotle over here. And the three Marias broke into full-bellied laughter, covering their mouths, shutting their eyes from tears, hanging their heads back, so loud the storm felt challenged for a second. Lita couldn't help but join in. For a moment, Lida and the three Marias felt as if they were back in Liberia. They could feel the white dust on their heels from dancing all night at the Salamandra ballroom. Teresa in the crystalline river, Carmen humming like her mother, a songbird. These microcosms of time, carved out by uncontrollable laughter, suspended from everything else, transported them back to a room in which everyone was still together, where there was no such thing as absence. In this elusive, fleeting moment of ebullience, all the world was whole again. Laughter, a time machine in which happiness could reconstruct the past, and the present couldn't do anything about it.
I think we have a question over here.
Hi, John. I'm so proud of you.
Star! You're a star.
So I know that you mentioned Virginia Woolf, but I was wondering, are there other pieces of art that inspired you? So not just writers, but like visual art, music, and stuff that inspired you that you feel is in some ways kind of infused through the work, even if it isn't directly written in there.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's really important for writers in the audience, watch a lot of TV because dialogue in books sucks. You want to go to the TV writers, to the screenwriters, to get really good, to the playwrights, to get really fantastic dialogue. And so I think that's, I don't think I write bad dialogue. And I get it from watching a lot of movies. I love Pedro Almodóvar. I love, what's his name? His name's not coming to me. Husband of Gina Rowlands. John Cassavetes. Thank you. Yes, John Cassavetes has fabulous dialogue. And they have such good dialogue, too, because they're not making their characters move the plot forward with their dialogue. They're allowing them the room to just talk. And that's what I really love about movies, I love about TV. Music is inextricable from this book. It's inextricable from anything that I write. You know, these characters talk about boleros, which is this musical genre, if you don't know, from the early 20th century, where they croon about love and they sing about heartbreak. And one of the three Marias says that's what traps you. Yeah. So you hear these people sing about love, and damn it, you want to be in it too. Thank you, Star.
I think there's two more questions. We'll do our best to get as many.
I think we had one up here. Did you have a question? Yeah. Oh, okay. Perfect.
Good afternoon.
Jasmine, what's going on?
What I wanted to say was, what inspired you to have like Carmen's like superpower be like hyper empathy to the point where she could literally read minds? Like I loved it, and I wanted to know what inspired that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I was like, what could happen to a Cancer who was unrestrained to her emotions?
You know my moon is or my moon rising or whatever
It's
is
emotional.
Cancer.
It's
It is
emotion.
so emotional. It's too much empathy.
But I think it also makes you a really good hostess. I think Cancer is like the hostess sign.
you.
But allowing, like I said, a lot of the novel is allowing room for the characters to express natures. And this was a very particularly sentimental and very sensitive character. And how did she grow on the page? She could feel what people were feeling. She could see what they were thinking. And I thought that was important to give that to her. And it also causes her a little bit of strife. But it's actually a pretty fun part of the book when everyone gets to it. Thank you, Jasmine.
I think we have.
Hi, Francisco. First of all, it's so exciting to see a Latinx author roughly my age, getting published. So snaps to that. In many ways, your book is a family drama, but we know that in Latin America, we come from a society that's often very stratified. You alluded to your characters exploring questions of gender and questions of like nationalism, but what about the class dynamic? I get the impression this is many of the characters are from a more bourgeois background, but what about the discourse happening with the workers, with the exploited people, and even maybe Latinos who are okay with the foreign economic interest because they know that that makes them an elite within this stratified society? Thank you.
Yeah. So that's classism is a huge part of the novel, and the husband of the protagonist is a banana laborer, and he says, I've worked with bananas since I was 10 years old. Sometimes they feel like my own fingers. He enters this family who is in financial ruin. So they used to be rich. The father used to be the head corporate lawyer for the American Fruit Company, but ever since he disappeared, they fell into financial ruin. And so this matriarch, the ghost that we read earlier, while she was alive, she could never reconcile being poor. She hated it. And so when her daughter comes home with a very poor laborer, she whisks herself and her things away to the guest house. And she never returns to watch her daughter kiss a peasant. And so it's these constant class dynamics always happening. Family in financial ruin, protagonist's best friend lives in this gorgeous mansion of blue Moroccan tile. Yeah. And so all of these things are always happening, I think, within the novel.
Yeah, for sure. And definitely there's struggle, like you said, to be seen and as poor, right? This idea of poverty and so.
Yeah, because class is also mercurial.
Yeah.
It is not concrete. You can lose your money, you can lose your status so very quickly, right? And that's
people hide that.
Say that again.
People hide that.
People hide that.
Yeah.
I live in New York City. The rent is insane. People are I'm one paycheck away from being homeless. And so many people are. The entire world is. And so I thought that was pretty important too, to talk about in the book. Yeah, thank you.
Let's do one more from this side, and then we gotta make sure we can sell and sign.
Hi,
Sonia.
great to see you, John. So my question is really dry. I really would love to see your book translated, and translated with Costa Rican way of speaking, idioms, right? Correct. So, how in the same manner that songs used to be made popular, and I guess they don't do that anymore because nobody really listens to the radio anymore, but in a way where a song became popular by calling a certain radio station, hey, I want to hear this song. You can get your whole family and all your friends to call. All of a sudden, that song becomes popular. Could a similar thing be done with the publisher where it's like, hey, publisher, I want this in Spanish. If you get this, you get your friends from Latin America to start calling and saying, hey, can we do this? Could that
Write
be
letters.
a manner
Yeah.
of getting this book published in Spanish?
I think that's a wonderful idea. I wouldn't know, honestly, how to navigate it. And I also think
Send an email
that-
to all your friends.
Well, it's true, but I think that conversation has been happening for the last 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
I think people have been fighting for English translations of Spanish literature, and publishers just won't listen. I mean, there was a hiccup in the hubris of the publishing industry when American Dirt happened.
Right.
Right, but that also didn't really affect translation.
Yeah.
And maybe there has to be sort of another hiccup, and it could be something very grassroots like that. And I love that idea. But I'm not that great of an organizer. I'm a terrible organizer.
Well, and I think a lot of people don't know. That's the I'm surprised. I've been reading for so many years, and I'm learning through talks with you all, why we don't have these. And I think having that awareness and pushing, like you said, what do we do now? Where do we go next? Those are part of the conversations that will lead to hopefully something substantial, that will change.
Yeah, thank you. That's my sister, everybody.
Hi.
Hey, Megan. Everyone say hi, Megan.
Hi. All right, so I have a question about some of the symbolism that keeps recurring in the novel and some of the bad omens that you keep seeing within the chapters. So like La Cegua or the cane toad, La Reina de la Noche. Can you tell us a little bit about how you picked those symbols and really why you placed them right before something bad is about to happen?
Sure. I love an omen. I love it when bad things are going to happen. So I'll talk about La Cegua. For time, I'll talk about La Cegua very quickly. So La Cegua is a Costa Rican folkloric monster, which is a woman who appears on the side of a road and she encounters a man on horseback. He could be drunk, he could be tired, but he's usually a pretty bad person. And so she says, "Sir, I have to get to the next town. can I ride with you? And she sits on his lap, and him being a pretty bad guy lets her sit on his lap. He begins having very awful thoughts, and somehow La Segua senses that. And when she does, she turns around, and where her gorgeous face had been, there is a horse's skull with flickering tongues of fire and sharp golden teeth, and the man dies of fright. It's such like a fantastic feminist symbol
It's like Medusa.
on the side of the road.
It's like Medusa with the snakes.
Yeah. She's like an anti-Virgin Mary, kind of. And so the Virgin Mary is obviously very big in Latin America, very specifically in Costa Rica. And she acts as sort of this like anti-Virgin Mary. And so I found it really important to put her in the book. Yeah, her specifically. Thank you, Meg.
Well, thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for writing
Thank
this
you.
beautiful book.
Lupita, thank you for having me. Thank you, DC Public Library and MLK for hosting us. This has
Yeah.
been so gorgeous. Thank you
Yeah.
to my family. Thank you to friends and family friends, people who I've known since I was like 0. That's crazy.
I love that. So he will be signing books.
Yes.
If you have a copy,
Yeah.
I think we have copies or perfect.
Yeah.
So check in with them, and thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
Also,
you.
we're going to Cuba Libre afterwards. I told them there would be 20 people. We're 20 people, right?
Yeah. I did want to make a quick plug. We will be back here September 19th with Alejandro Varela, who wrote a beautiful short story collection, The People Who Report More Stress. We'll be here at 7 o'clock, so please join us. Did you want to do your audience selfie?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have a copy of the book, if you don't, I'll give you mine. Can you just hold it up and I'm gonna do a little audience selfie for him. We might need to bend down a little.
I've never done an audience selfie.
Ready? Or go like this, yeah, sideways.
Let's do it.
Okay. Sideways.
Yeah, I'm terrible at selfies.
Okay.
Oh my goodness, there's so many of you.
Ready, 1, 2. 1, 2.
Yay.
There you go.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.